AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Don Wright. Don is the founder, president, and CEO of Clarigent Health. Don, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Well, now it's our pleasure. Thanks for joining. Let's start with yourself, Don. Can you give a brief background on your own career, particularly where you got involved in technology-related work, and then walk us through your journey, taking us up to the formation of Clarigent Health?
My background is all in computer science and data science. My degrees are in computer science. I started directly out of college in what at the time was a very tiny little software company here in Cincinnati that within the first year got bought, and then 2 years later got bought again, and then bought 22 other companies and became at the time the largest privately held software company in the United States, and got to work on some really fascinating things, everything from military applications to banking applications. We went through, it was, the internet was kind of coming online when we were at that company. So everything from helping the military connect their mainframes through the internet, which they didn't know how to do, to helping Disney create their first ticketing system with FastPath and all that type of stuff. So And we actually created what we think is the first HTML-based banking system. So for a bank in Florida, so got to do a very wide set of things with what we did there. I was there. I started as a software engineer 1, and 5 years later was the VP of product development, and then the head of product development for global. And so was extremely kind of lucky where I started my career that I was able to get to do a lot of different things in a lot of different places around the world using software. From there, went to a few different startups, some really interesting ones, but we could talk all day about those. And eventually was the co-founder of a company called SAS Capital, which was, as far as we know, the first company in the United States to be willing to loan money directly to SaaS-based software companies, because banks still hadn't figured it out. They hadn't figured out that a subscription can look like an accounts receivable. That was going great until the global financial crisis hit, and then we kind of shut that down, and I was immediately asked to start looking at some technology that we turned into Assurex Health, which was the company right before Clarigent. That company was developing the Clairgent technology as its second product when we sold that company. And that company is a fun story we could tell someday, where we literally started on the loading dock of a strip mall and called it a garage, and built our genetics lab in the karate dojo that went out of business next to us, and sold the company for a whole lot of money and exited. But the Clairgent technology was, we had the rights to, but when we sold that company, the company we sold to was not interested in anything we hadn't commercialized. So I helped with the transition and then exited out, and one of the founders of Assurex and I started Clairgent, and that's how we got to Clairgent.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate the background, and I'm sure there are plenty of good parts of each of the startups. But focusing on Clarigent, can you take us through the journey from the idea behind it, what the overall objective was, and what the journey has been like over the past 2.5 years or so?
Yeah, so the technology itself, the core technology, was originally developed by John Pestian, Dr. John Pestian at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And he was also one of the founding inventors of the previous company's technology. And so that's how we got involved with it. He started that work more than 15 years ago. He first started publishing on it 13, 12 years ago. And we started working with it at Assurax about 9 years ago. So even though Clairgent is only a few years old, I've been involved with this technology for almost a decade. John is a brilliant man. He's very dedicated to suicide prevention in particular. He's off working on some other projects now with that, and he handed this technology basically over to us. And so he had done a few clinical trials. He had shown that the technology works. He had shown that it works in acute situations. So, for example, in an emergency department, when you're trying to triage whether somebody has to be brought into the hospital or whether they can be sent home for an outpatient visit. What we did when we took over the technology were a couple of things. One, we honestly had to make it into a product. It was a technology, right? So we had to do everything from figure out how it would be used in a professional setting. So how, would it be on a smartphone? Would it be on a tablet? Would it be used in telemedicine? How would you do that in a way that doesn't change the dynamic between the therapist and the patient, right? You want it to be kind of in the background, not causing something different to happen in that therapy session. And also, what happens when the internet goes down right in the middle of a session? What happens if you have to encrypt this data? This is very much PHI, right? So how do you do all the things around it to make it secure and to make people comfortable to use it? And then we went out and started testing it in other ways. So like I said, the original technology was first instance with a patient, acute situations. We wanted to see if it would work in an existing therapy scenario where you already knew the doctor and you were just coming in for your every other week office visit. And we did that in schools first with therapists that were taking care of children. And really the goal there was, again, just to make sure that it wouldn't change the therapeutic relationship, but also because we were seeing these children over the course of a school year, we could get lots of data points over time and build baselines for each individual and start to look at, are they moving up or down off those baselines? And so when you're talking about especially suicide prevention, very important to understand whether you're coming up or down off your baseline and whether there's a true environmental reason for why that's happening. So it could be just as bad for somebody to be looking like they're doing better when there's no actual reason for why they would be doing better. Nothing has changed in their life, because sometimes what that indicates is that they've made a plan and they're no longer worried about the future and how bad things are and things like that. So we provide that information to the doctors. The doctors are responsible for then figuring out what's really going on with that patient, why it's happening, and they're informed into kind of what we think is going on, but it's ultimately up to the doctor to figure out what treatments should happen for those patients.
Excellent. I appreciate the overview. You and I were speaking previously about the impact of technology and data science and AI that it's having within healthcare and how the mission behind Clarigent Health is so impactful. I'd love to get your take on what it's been like to take this from concept to now seeing it having a true impact, what it's like to be part of the data team, and give us some insight into some of the projects that your data team is currently working on.
So I think it's a amazingly interesting company to work for as a data scientist. Again, I don't get to do any of the data science anymore because I'm the CEO, so I'm mostly trying to talk to investors and find customers, right? But I get to listen to them, and I get to hear what they're telling people, and I get to watch the projects they're doing. And from just a straight data science perspective, they're working on some pretty cool things. I mean, it's not so we do, and I probably haven't even really explained this yet. We do vocal biomarkers, right? So we are listening to what people say and how they say it, and using that to classify them at that point in time against other known models. So if you're talking about suicide prevention, we're looking at people who were suicidal versus people who were not, and we're able to basically score people on kind of where they sit on a crisis scale and those types of things. So they're working on that type of leading edge technology, right? But in addition, as data scientists, they're getting tons of data about these patients and trying to create insights and little nuggets of useful information for the therapists and also for the administrators of those therapists, right? So in addition to looking at individuals in a particular session or individuals over time, they're building models to show they're predicting that fifth grade boys across greater Cincinnati are doing worse than fifth grade girls, and that maybe, we don't know why that is, but we can see that it is. So somebody should be looking into, do fifth grade boys not like to have female therapists because they're embarrassed, or do they just not want to meet with therapists at all, or what kinds of things have to happen? And then on top of that, just other just amazing things. We're trying to build avatars so that we can scale up and have like 5-minute check-ins with patients where an avatar would pop up on the screen. But it's not as simple as just a chat bot, because you're trying to elicit emotions from somebody. So you've got to figure out how to do that. You've got to figure out in a clinical trial whether you're getting the same types of signals, but then also you have to do some other stuff that really has nothing to do with our base technology, just things like, can that avatar figure out whether you have answered the question enough for us to get a signal? And if not, can it prompt you to keep going, which is very different than, say, talking to Alexa or talking to a chatbot when you're trying to get customer support at a hotel or something like that, right? So I think that the science of what they're doing is challenging and fascinating pretty much every minute of the day that they're there. And then on top of it, everything they're doing is leading to a point where we are saving more and more people's lives by these technologies predicting what is going on with those individuals and helping get the right treatment to them. So I never disparage anybody's work. I think that using data science and AI to pick stocks or to figure out how to get me to buy something on Amazon or something is good work, and it puts food on people's tables, and it has its place. But I think that when you're blessed with everything I do all day, at the end of the day, hopefully is now going to save more lives, it's a very different feeling. So
absolutely, it gives meaning to the work.
Right.
So obviously, it's an incredibly interesting time to be working within healthcare tech, and it's now becoming really evident how big a sort of revolution is happening across all different services, from drug discovery to hospital experience to digital health. When you look at the past 2.5 years for Clarigent and you look at the milestones that you've been able to achieve, what are you most excited about looking forward for the future of the business over, say, the next 18 months to 24 months?
So I think we're in a growth stage right now. So the obvious answer, and not my final answer, is just the growth and getting this into more hands and seeing how it can be used all throughout the United States, because every time you put it somewhere, you're helping more people. But I think from a higher level and kind of more interesting level is that we're finally, first of all, we're finally, as you just said, finally at a place where we're taking these techniques and the science and applying it towards drug discovery, like you said, towards treatment options, towards the types of things that can actually help people, because that part of healthcare is, in technology, and especially in mental health where we are, was almost non-existent until recently. But the other thing that we're finally doing is trying to rethink, I think, in a serious way, how healthcare is delivered and paid for in the United States, and things like continuity of care and not thinking of behavioral health and physical health as two different things that need to be kept separate, and thinking about so one of the things that some of our customers are doing is looking at not just how do you prove, they can use it as an objective score, right, to show that patients are getting better, and they can use it individually with patients to see who's getting better and who's not after a treatment change and those types of things. But and those are all exciting things, but they can also use it to figure out that a patient would be better served now by not being in the behavioral health system and being back with primary care, because they're at a point where behavioral health is no longer behavioral health physician is no longer needed for them, or maybe only needed in a maintenance mode every few months or something like that. And that's really what we're working hard to do, is figure out how do you take this technology and put it where the people are. So we're working with school systems, with learning management systems, to be looking at like kids journaling they're doing and using school attendance and grades and those types of things to predict where particular children are going, and trying to get the most effective type of treatment to them, even if that treatment's not what you would consider to be treatment, right? Because there's lots of different things, especially in behavioral health, like maybe this child needs to get more involved in recreational soccer or some other type of, hobby or sport or band or whatever. And if you can get them into that 3 years before they would have ended up at the emergency department, maybe they never end up at the emergency department. And so that's wonderful for a how to help people standpoint. And we're finally at a point where we're seeing that if you can do those things, the CFOs of hospital systems and insurance providers are actually interested, because it certainly costs them nothing to get the kid to play on a soccer field, but it costs them more than they'll ever make in their actuarial table for that patient if they end up in an inpatient psych ward, right?
Yeah, preventive care being the holy grail of this type of work. If we can solve the problem before it becomes one, that's the biggest impact. Right. I want to now spend some time talking about Clarigent's data team, and obviously with the continued growth, you're going to need to bring in skill sets across various aspects of the current team. Can you sort of give us some insight into what the team looks like currently? What's the makeup of engineers, scientists, and where you expect that to be over the next 12 months?
I guess I'd have to go back and actually go think about their resumes, but I know certainly none of the data scientists on our team, including Dr. Josh Cohen, who runs it, were involved in healthcare directly before they came to us. I think that both of them had done a little bit of work with military projects, not in the military, but working as contractors for the military. We had, one who had done some work in a large, Procter & Gamble, right? Very large consumer oriented type work. And I think that the mistake that has been made for many, many years is people started to think about how does data science affect medicine. I think, of course, we all know, I think, that the original kind of work that was done in data science around hospital systems and insurers were all about how do you build population health studies to figure out where you're going to make your money, how do you figure out staffing, how do you figure out kind of when you're going to run out of supply. I mean, all the kind of basic things that were done in any industry. And now we're starting to use them in ways that are very different than that. And so you don't need to go out and find data scientists that worked in a hospital system, right? You need to go out and just find really smart data scientists, because this is data science, right? And this isn't just, stuff you could build in a Excel spreadsheet and calculate out yourself. I mean, this is interesting stuff where we even have the problems where we have to go back and make sure that we can even explain how it's coming to this conclusion, because FDA, won't let us, and rightfully so. I mean, without us being able to explain why something is happening, we aren't allowed to use this on humans, right? Because you've got to know why it's making the decisions it's making. And so I think we're looking for people, I think like any good hire in a company, we're looking for people, of course, that, are qualified and have the background, but I think we're looking for people who are inquisitive, people who didn't come here to be told, okay, I need you now to go build a classifier for, fifth grade boys and see how it's different than fifth grade girls. We want somebody who's coming to us and saying, you've got a real bias problem in here because you don't have enough, because you've got no subjects in your base model that are transgender, and yet 10% of the population in this part of the world where you're using it is transgender. So how in the world could we ever know that this product's working there? And you need that kind of thing to happen from the people who are closest to the data and the models, because some of that stuff is obvious to us who run the business, but ethics around AI, especially in healthcare, and then the bias and prejudice parts of the models. Actually, we just got an NIH grant to look at bias in our models, to make sure, some of them are obvious, right? Some of them you say, well, duh, of course you have to have enough male, female, you have to have enough African American, Caucasian, you have to have enough inner city school versus suburbs. But that's the easy stuff, right? And so you're just looking for people who want to solve the problem and want to spend all day thinking about different ways to solve the problem, and not, you're not looking for a CPA to come in and do your taxes. You're looking for true data science and I think that's what's so exciting about working here. I think at times, besides everything else we talked about, is just that our data science team is in, somebody from that team is in every business meeting we have in the company. They're in the product planning meetings. We're asking them, what can you do? They're asking us, what do you want us to do? How would this work? I think one of the things I'm most impressed with about Josh is how many times when we're talking about what we're looking for in the next model, he is immediately trying to understand, well, how are you going to use this? Where are you going to use it? What are you trying to, present back to somebody? Are you trying to just present back, yes, no, they need to stay at the hospital? Or are you trying to get a granularity where you can see that they're actually changing across each day of a week or something like that? Because those are very different models and we need very different data. And so, I think people who want to be included in those types of discussions and not just sit in a dark room with a monitor in front of them staring at data all day are the kind of people that we're looking for.
Excellent. I appreciate that overview, because it helps people understand that you don't necessarily need to be coming from the background in order to transition into it, as long as you've got the core fundamentals and an interest in the space, which is, as we touched on earlier, there's an amazing mission behind the work.
Well, and I think sometimes, but it's actually important to have people in there who absolutely were not part of it, because then they think differently, right? So having somebody who actually built stock models for a while is going to come in and think differently than somebody who's been looking at suicide rates for the last 10 years. So you need both, but I think it's imperative that you actually bring in people who have not had the background in the medical field, because you're just going to think a different way. And I think that's important.
Don, I want to thank you for coming on and talking to us today. It's been great to learn about what's happening at Clarigent Health. Incredibly interesting product in a much needed area. And the fact that you guys are already having such success gives us hope for how it's going to continue to develop. And it sounds like an amazing place to work. I'm sure people listening now will find it fascinating. And we wish you all the best in the continued growth and success.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.